He buried his wife after a car crash. He stood at the edge of her grave, watching the casket disappear beneath layers of dirt, believing his world had ended that night. But what if I told you, 9 years later, his daughter swore she saw that same woman, alive, shopping in another state? Stay with me. Because once you hear what really happened, you'll never look at the word goodbye the same way again. Derek Lawson wasn't a celebrity, wasn't someone you'd read about in the papers. He was a steelworker in Birmingham, Alabama. The kind of man who clocked in on time, stayed late if a coworker needed a hand, and still came home with just enough energy to tuck his daughter into bed. And he had one thing that made every long shift worth it: his wife, Selena. Selena was a nurse at a local clinic. Everyone loved her. She had that voice, soothing, warm, like she could calm a crying child just by saying their name. Derek always said she was the light in every dark room. And together, with their 9-year-old daughter Aaliyah, they looked like the kind of family you'd see in a church photo directory. Strong, loving, unbreakable. But here's the thing about life: it doesn't ask permission before it takes everything from you. It was October 28th. Derek remembered the date because it was the night the temperature finally dipped low enough to smell wood smoke in the air. Selena had just finished a double shift at the clinic. Exhausted but still smiling. Derek offered to drive her home, but she laughed it off. "Baby, it's 20 minutes, she said, leaning down to kiss him before heading out. That's the last image he carried of her, Selena in her scrubs, walking out the door like it was just another night. Except it wasn't. Around 11:45 p.m., Derek's phone rang. On the other end, a state trooper. Calm, rehearsed, but with a weight in his tone that made Derek's chest tighten. "There's been an accident. Route 11. Sir, you need to come." Derek's stomach dropped. He grabbed his keys, sprinted to the car, and raced through back roads, every mile heavier than the last. When he arrived, flashing blue and red lights lit up the night. The air smelled of gasoline and burned rubber. He saw twisted metal, Selena's car, crumpled beyond recognition. And then, the sheet. That white sheet covering a body lying motionless on the pavement. Derek's knees buckled. His mind screamed that this couldn't be real. But when he saw Selena's purse lying next to the wreck, there was no denying it. His wife was gone. The days that followed were a blur. Neighbors dropped off casseroles he never ate. Reverend Charles Whitaker preached about faith in God's plan, but the words bounced off Derek like rain on concrete. He couldn't hear anything past the sound of dirt hitting that casket. Aaliyah cried herself to sleep for weeks, clutching the teddy bear her mama had bought her for Christmas. Derek tried to be strong, packing lunches, fumbling through braiding her hair, pretending to smile at parent-teacher meetings. But every night, when Aaliyah closed her bedroom door, he sat in silence. Grief pressing on his chest like it wanted to crush the life out of him. Now let me pause for a second. Because this is where a lot of people click off true crime stories. They think, it's just another sad tale. But I need you to hear me, this is not just another story. This is where everything starts to unravel. And if you don't subscribe right now, you're going to miss the moment where reality flips upside down. If this happened in your town tomorrow, wouldn't you want to know first? Subscribe now so you're never the one left in the dark. And if you're still not subscribing, drop into the comments. Tell me why. Because if you'd ignore this warning, you owe the rest of us an explanation. Back to Derek. The funeral was closed casket. The coroner told him the damage was too severe. "You don't want that image to be your last memory," they said. And in his grief, Derek didn't fight it. He signed papers without looking too closely. Numb. Broken. But later, late at night, when the house was silent, that decision haunted him. He realized he never actually saw Selena's body. And let me ask you, would you ever bury someone without seeing their face one last time? Think about it. If the unthinkable happened and you couldn't say goodbye properly, wouldn't you want someone to tell you the truth? Subscribe now before the next twist catches you off guard. Weeks stretched into months. Derek stumbled through life, doing his best to raise Aaliyah. Neighbors like Miss Evelyn Jackson would bring over cornbread, checking in, telling him to stay strong. Tyrone Mitchell, his lifelong friend, sat with him on quiet nights, drinking beer in silence. But no matter how much support came, Derek's nights ended the same way, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from him. Selena's chair. And here's the cruel part. Time doesn't heal, not really. Time just teaches you how to carry the weight. By the 1-year mark, Derek thought maybe, Just maybe he could move forward. Not happy, not healed, just surviving. But Aaliyah never stopped asking questions. Daddy, why was the casket closed? Daddy, why couldn't we see Mama one last time? Every question stabbed Derek in a place he thought was already numb. If you've ever felt that pain, the ache of unanswered questions, then you know why we tell these stories. Subscribe so you stand with the families who never stop searching for the truth. And if you won't subscribe, comment below. Tell me why you turn away when families like Derek's are still waiting for answers. But what Derek didn't know, what none of them knew, was that everything they believed about Selena's death was about to be shattered. Because one night, while sorting through boxes in the attic, Derek found something that didn't belong. A slip of paper. An address. And that single piece of paper would send him on a journey that flipped his entire world upside down. Most people think the story ends at the grave. It doesn't. Subscribe now, because the truth is always darker than the funeral sermon. But before we get to that discovery, you need to understand the weight Derek carried, and how every single night pushed him closer to breaking. Because that weight? That's what made him chase ghosts, even when every sane person told him to stop. She walked out the door one night and never came back. If it happened to your loved one, would you want the truth? Subscribe now. Don't wait until it's too late. Derek Lawson thought he buried his wife. He thought the casket lowered into the earth was the end of her story. But in just a moment, we're stepping into a world where the dead don't stay buried, and the truth refuses to stay hidden. Life doesn't pause after tragedy. Bills keep coming. The world keeps spinning. And in Birmingham, Alabama, neighbors keep showing up, whether you want them to or not. The first Sunday after Selena's funeral, Derek walked into Greater Hope Baptist Church holding Aaliyah's hand. Reverend Whitaker's voice filled the sanctuary, but every hymn, every prayer, every amen felt hollow without Selena's voice beside him. He sat stiff in the pew, staring at the empty space where she should have been. Aaliyah leaned against him, silent, her small frame shaking with every verse. After service, church mothers hugged him too long, whispering, "Stay strong, baby. God's got you." Their words were kind, but they slid off Derek like rain on a steel roof. Nothing could reach him. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, routine shifted. On Saturdays, Derek brought Aaliyah to family cookouts hosted by Miss Evelyn Jackson, the neighbor who treated everyone's kids like her own. Smoke from the grill carried across the yard. Music thumped from speakers. People laughed, danced, clapped to old Frankie Beverly and May's tracks. But Derek wasn't laughing. He wasn't dancing. He stood in the corner, paper plate untouched, watching fathers flip burgers and hold their wives close. Watching mothers brush the hair from their daughters' faces. And every smile burned like salt in an open wound. Because the one person who should have been there, the one who made life feel full, was gone. Still, Aaliyah needed normalcy. She ran around the yard with cousins, played double dutch in the driveway, and held her plate piled high with ribs and mac and cheese. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile a child puts on for their daddy's sake. When the music died down and the night got quiet, Derek would find her curled up in bed, clutching that same teddy bear Selena gave her. Whispers of "I miss you, mommy," escaping into the dark. Derek would sit by the door, tears silently streaming, hating himself for not being able to bring her mama back. Here's where most people click away from stories like this. They don't want to sit in the grief. But listen, if you turn away now, you'll miss the cracks in the story. Cracks that prove Selena's death wasn't what it seemed. If your loved one vanished and the answers never added up, wouldn't you want to know the truth? Subscribe now, because the twists in this story will leave you questioning everything. And if you're not subscribing, drop into the comments. Why would you choose to stay blind when the truth is right here? By the time Aaliyah was 12, the house carried a rhythm again. Mornings started with burnt toast and rushed braids. Evenings ended with homework spread across the kitchen table. Derek learned to survive, but surviving is not the same as living. He started noticing small details that haunted him. Like the accident report. The state trooper told him it was a head-on collision, but the other driver walked away without a scratch. How does one car get mangled beyond repair while the other barely dents a bumper? Or the funeral home director telling him the casket had to stay closed. Why so insistent? Why not let him decide? And every time Derek asked for answers, people shut the conversation down. Don't dwell, D. She's gone. You gotta move on. But grief doesn't silence questions. It makes them louder. On Aaliyah's 15th birthday, Derek planned a small gathering, just cake, family, and a few friends. He lit candles, sang happy birthday, and watched her smile through tears. When everyone left, Aaliyah lingered by the window. "Daddy," she whispered, "why can't I remember Mama's face that night? At the funeral. It's like she wasn't even there." Derek froze. He didn't have an answer. He only had the same gnawing emptiness. That night, lying awake, he thought about the crash again. About how he'd never seen her body. About how Selena's purse was the only proof they gave him. And deep down, a terrible thought took root. What if the casket was empty? Now pause for a second. Imagine burying someone without ever seeing them. Imagine years later realizing you might have buried nothing at all. If this happened to your family, if your loved one's casket could have been empty, wouldn't you demand answers? Subscribe right now because the answers in this story will shake you. And if you won't subscribe, comment below. What would you do if you realized your goodbye might have been a lie? By 2015, Aaliyah was no longer the little girl clutching a teddy bear. She was 18 now, tall, sharp-tongued like her mama, with a fire in her eyes that Derek both admired and feared. She had just come back from visiting her cousin in Houston. For a week, she seemed distracted, quiet, lost in her phone, chewing her lip when she thought no one was looking. One evening they sat at dinner, the silence heavy between them. Derek tried to cut the tension. "Food okay?" Aaliyah set down her fork, staring at him with eyes that looked too much like Selena's. And then, in a trembling voice, she whispered words that made Derek's blood run cold. "Daddy, I saw Mom." The words hung in the air like smoke. Derek stared at Aaliyah across the dinner table, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. "What did you say?" His voice was low, steady, but his hand trembled. Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears. "I saw Mom. In Houston. At the mall. She was alive." Derek slammed his fork down, the clatter breaking the silence. "Aaliyah, don't you ever play with me like that." "I'm not playing," she shouted back, her voice cracking. It was her. Same face. Same voice. She was with some man and a little boy. I called out, she looked right at me. And then she walked away. For a long moment, Derek just sat there staring at his daughter. His heart wanted to reject it, to protect himself from hope that could tear him apart all over again. But there was something in her eyes. Something he recognized. It was the same look she gave him as a child, when she said she'd seen monsters in the closet. The same look that demanded to be believed. And this time, Derek couldn't dismiss it so easily. That night, Derek lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow circles. His mind replayed the night of the crash, the funeral, every unanswered question. He remembered the coroner's firm tone, "You don't want to see her like this." He remembered how quickly the casket had been sealed. How neighbors whispered that the whole thing seemed odd. And then there was Tyrone Mitchell, his best friend since middle school. One night, after too many beers, Tyrone had leaned close and muttered, "Man, that accident report never sat right with me. Two-car collision, right? But the other driver walked away clean. How'd that work? Metal don't fold like that unless something's off." Derek had brushed it off at the time. But now his daughter was saying she saw Selena alive. And the weight of those doubts pressed down like a vice. Imagine this. You buried your spouse. You stood at their grave. You taught yourself to live with the ache. And then, almost a decade later, your own child swears they saw them alive. If this happened to you, would you want to know the truth? Or would you rather stay in the dark? Subscribe now because in the next moments, the truth will unravel in ways you won't be ready for. And if you're not subscribing, comment below. Tell me, why would you choose ignorance when your loved one's life might be a lie? The next morning, Derek tried to act normal. He packed Aaliyah's breakfast, asked about her Houston trip, pretended like her words from last night hadn't ripped open an old wound. But Aaliyah wouldn't let it go. "Daddy, I know what I saw," she said, her voice steady now. "If you don't believe me, that's on you. But I saw her." Derek wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her it was grief, memory playing tricks, a stranger who just looked like her mama. But deep down, in that hidden place where denial couldn't reach, he felt it, a flicker of hope. And that hope terrified him more than the grief ever had. That evening, Derek sat with Tyrone on the back porch. The night air was thick with the smell of charcoal and cut grass. He told his friend what Aaliyah had said. Tyrone's face went pale. "D, you can't be serious." She swears it was her. Tyrone shook his head. Man, you buried that woman. I buried a casket, Derek muttered. Those words hit him hard. Because it was true. He never actually saw Selena's face in death. Just a coffin. Just a stone in the ground. And suddenly, the certainty he had carried for 9 years began to crack. Later that week, Derek found himself in the attic, sorting through old boxes. He came across Selena's things. Photo albums, birthday cards, her nursing badge. And then, tucked deep inside, a folded slip of paper. An address. Houston, Texas. His heart stopped. His hands shook as he held it, staring at the city name. The same city Aaliyah had just returned from. Coincidence? Or proof? Derek sat down hard on the attic floor, the paper trembling in his fingers. He could feel the room spin around him. For 9 years he told himself the story was finished. That Selena's chapter had closed with dirt on a casket. But now he wasn't so sure. What if his daughter was right? What if Selena Lawson hadn't died that night? What if the grave he visited every year was nothing but an empty box? And here's the terrifying part. Derek wasn't alone in those doubts. Because if the truth really was hidden all this time, that meant someone out there wanted it hidden. Think about it. If someone could fake a death this perfectly, could they do it in your city, in your family? Subscribe now, because the twist you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you believe about goodbye. And if you refuse to subscribe, at least comment below. Tell me why you'd choose to turn your back when the next twist could be waiting right outside your door. Derek stuffed the paper into his pocket, heart pounding. He knew what it meant. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He couldn't keep pretending Aaliyah was imagining things. If Selena was alive, he had to find her. And that decision, the one he made in the dusty silence of his attic, was the moment Derek Lawson stepped out of grief and into a mystery darker than he ever imagined. Derek sat on the attic floor, staring at the slip of paper in his hand. A Houston address. Faded ink, Selena's handwriting. He turned it over again and again, his heart hammering in his chest. 9 years. 9 long years of graveside visits, of sleepless nights, of raising Aaliyah alone. 9 years of telling himself the story was finished. And yet here it was. A single piece of paper that threatened to unravel everything. That night, Derek couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the address like it might burn a hole straight through him. Aaliyah came downstairs, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, you okay?" He quickly folded the paper and shoved it in his pocket. "Yeah, baby girl. Just thinking." She hesitated, then whispered, "I know you don't believe me, but I saw her." Her voice cracked. Tears welled up in her eyes. And in that moment, Derek realized the truth wasn't just about him. It was about his daughter too. Because if Selena really was alive, then Aaliyah had been robbed of her mother. And that thought nearly broke him all over again. The next day, Derek met Tyrone on the porch. He pulled the slip of paper from his pocket and handed it over. Tyrone squinted at it. "Houston? Where'd you get this?" "Found it in Selena's things. Same city Aaliyah just came back from." Tyrone cursed under his breath, shaking his head. Don't do this. Don't you go chasing ghosts. That way lies madness." But Derek's eyes stayed locked on the horizon. "If she's alive, I need to know." Tyrone sighed. "And if she's not? What then? You gonna rip yourself open all over again? What about Aaliyah? What if she's wrong?" Derek didn't answer. Because deep down he knew Tyrone was right. But he also knew he couldn't live the rest of his life with that slip of paper burning a hole in his pocket. Now, imagine standing in Derek's shoes. On one side, the chance that your grief was real, that chasing answers would only reopen wounds that never healed. On the other, the possibility that your wife, the woman you buried, was out there, alive. If it were you, could you just ignore it? Or would you need to know, no matter the cost? Subscribe now, because the truth Derek uncovers will shake everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and death itself. And if you're not subscribing, comment below. Why would you choose silence when the truth is within reach? That evening, Derek packed a small duffel bag. Just a few clothes, his old work boots, his father's Bible. He tried to tell himself it was nothing. Just a trip. Just a way to prove Aaliyah wrong, to settle his own restless heart. But when he looked at his daughter, he knew better. "Daddy, where are you going?" she asked softly. Derek swallowed hard. I need to check something." "Is it about Mom?" He froze. Her eyes were locked on his, searching. "Yes," he whispered. For the first time in years, Aaliyah smiled through tears. "Then bring her back." As Derek zipped the bag, Tyrone showed up one last time. "Dee, listen to me. If she really faked her death, there's a reason. And reasons like that, they ain't good. People don't disappear without someone pulling the strings." Derek met his friend's eyes. "Then I'll cut the strings." Tyrone exhaled, defeated. "Then promise me one thing, don't lose yourself in this." But Derek already knew it was too late for promises. The next morning, before dawn, Derek loaded the bag into his car. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets still wet from last night's rain. He paused at the end of the driveway, staring back at the house. The place where he'd raised his daughter, where he'd mourned his wife. The only place that had kept him tethered to the idea of normal. And now he was leaving it behind. As the engine rumbled to life, Derek gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. His chest ached with a mixture of fear, hope, and rage. Because if Selena was alive, then someone had lied to him. Someone had stolen nearly a decade of his life. Think about that. If someone lied to you for 9 years, could you forgive them? Or would you chase the truth even if it killed you? Subscribe right now, because the road Derek takes is about to reveal betrayals darker than any grave. And if you won't subscribe, at least comment. Tell us why you'd choose to walk away when someone you loved might still be breathing. Derek pulled onto the highway, the glow of Birmingham fading in his rearview mirror. Every mile carried him further from grief, and closer to something he couldn't yet name. As the sun broke over the horizon, he whispered into the empty car, his voice heavy with determination. "If she's alive, someone lied to me for 9 years." The drive to Houston took 9 long hours. Derek barely noticed the miles slipping past. The endless stretch of highway, the green exit signs, the billboards promising barbecue and cheap gas. His mind was a storm, circling the same haunting question. What if she's alive? By the time he crossed into Texas, his hands ached from gripping the steering wheel so tight. Houston hit him like a wall. The city was nothing like Birmingham. Neon lights buzzed above crowded intersections. Traffic honked and snarled in every direction. Strangers rushed past, each one carrying a story Derek would never know. But he wasn't here for the city. He was here for her. The address in Selena's handwriting had led him to a modest neighborhood. White siding. Overgrown grass. Toys scattered in the yard like kids had been playing there not long ago. Derek parked a few houses down, his palms slick with sweat, his chest pounding. For a long moment he sat frozen in the car, watching. And then the door opened. She stepped outside. Selena. Older now, yes. A few more lines around her eyes. Hair cut shorter than he remembered. But it was her. The woman he had buried. The woman he had mourned for nearly a decade. Derek's breath caught in his throat. His vision blurred with tears. His world tilted on its axis. She was alive. But before he could move, before he could even breathe her name, someone else stepped out behind her. A man. Tall. Broad shoulders. Confident stride. And in his hand, small fingers curled around his own, a little boy maybe 4 years old. Selena leaned down, brushing the child's hair back with the tenderness of a mother. Then she looked up at the man and smiled. Not the smile Derek remembered, the one that used to belong only to him. This was different. Private. And just like that, Derek's heart shattered a second time. He stayed there for hours, watching from the safety of his car as they piled into the SUV, drove off and returned later. Each time Selena laughed, it cut deeper. Each time the man touched her shoulder, Derek's fists clenched tighter. She wasn't just alive. She had a new life. A new man. A new family. When the sun finally set, Derek drove to a cheap motel on the east side of the city. The kind of place with flickering lights and a buzzing ice machine in the hallway. He dropped his bag on the bed and sat in silence, staring at the stained curtains. His mind replayed the scene again and again. Selena's smile. The boy's laughter. The way the man held her hand like it had always belonged there. Derek's chest tightened until he couldn't breathe. He pressed his palms into his eyes, forcing back the tears, but they came anyway. For 9 years he carried grief like an anchor. For 9 years he told himself his wife was gone, that his daughter was motherless, that life had cheated him. But the truth was worse. She hadn't died. She had chosen to leave. And here's the question I need you to ask yourself. What would break you more? Death or betrayal? If the person you buried showed up years later with a new family, could you forgive them? Or would you feel robbed of your entire life? Subscribe now, because Derek's next discovery will rip this story wide open. And if you're not subscribing, comment below. Tell me, could you live with a betrayal this deep? That night in the motel, Derek fell apart. He punched the wall until his knuckles bled. He screamed into the pillow until his throat burned. He stared at the ceiling, asking questions the silence refused to answer. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come back? Was I not enough? Was our daughter not enough? Hours passed. The neon sign outside flickered against the wall, painting the room in pulses of red and blue. Derek sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, shaking. He wasn't just a widower anymore. He was a man betrayed. And deep down, one thought festered like poison. If Selena was alive, who else had lied to him? Now pause. Think about the people in your life, the ones you trust without question. Your spouse, your best friend, your family. What if one day you learned they'd been lying to you all along? Could you handle that truth? Or would it destroy you? Subscribe right now, because the answers Derek uncovers next will shake your faith in everyone you thought you knew. And if you're still refusing to subscribe, comment below. Tell us why you'd choose denial over the truth staring you in the face. By morning, Derek's eyes were swollen, his hands raw. But beneath the grief, a new fire burned. He had spent 9 years mourning a lie. Now he needed answers. And what Derek didn't know, what he couldn't know yet, was that the truth wasn't just about Selena. It was about a secret darker than any grave. Derek didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the clock as it ticked past 2 in the morning. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the ice machine in the hallway. His mind was a storm of betrayal and questions. That's when the knock came. 3 sharp raps against the door. Derek froze. His heart pounded in his chest. At this hour in this part of town, no knock was ever good news. He hesitated, then stepped closer, his voice low. "Who is it?" A woman's voice answered, calm but firm. "Derek Lawson?" Every muscle in his body tensed. "Yeah. Who's asking?" The door cracked open, revealing a woman in her mid-30s. Dark jacket, sharp eyes, steady posture. She flashed a badge. "Detective Renee Carter. Houston PD. We need to talk." Derek didn't trust easily, not anymore. He kept the door half shut. "Middle of the night? You couldn't wait till morning?" Carter's expression didn't change. "If I waited, you might not be alive to hear it." Something in her tone told Derek she wasn't bluffing. Against his better judgment, he let her in. They sat across from each other, the weak motel lamp casting shadows on the wall. Carter leaned forward, voice low. "Mr. Lawson, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Your wife isn't who you think she is." Derek barked out a bitter laugh. "I buried her. I spent 9 years grieving her. Now I see her walking around Houston with a new family. Don't tell me who she is, I know who she is." Carter shook her head. "You don't." Selena Lawson, if that's even her real name, was tied to a case that never went public. A big one. The kind of case that can't end in headlines because too many powerful people are involved. She was placed in a program, a kind of protection. Her death wasn't real. Derek's blood ran cold. "Protection? You mean witness protection?" Carter didn't answer directly, but the silence was enough. For a long moment, Derek couldn't breathe. His wife had been alive all along. Not stolen by fate, not taken by tragedy, but hidden, covered up by people who never gave him a choice. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" His voice cracked, raw with rage. "Why did I bury an empty box?" Carter's eyes softened just slightly. "Because you weren't supposed to know. You and your daughter were collateral. To keep her safe, you had to believe she was gone." Collateral. The word hit like a punch to the gut. Derek's grief, his daughter's tears, years of emptiness, reduced to a strategy. Now think about this. Imagine the worst day of your life, the funeral, the heartbreak, only to learn it was orchestrated. Not for your healing, not for your peace, but because you were just collateral. If it were you, could you forgive that? Or would it haunt you forever? Call to action 1, fear guilt trip. If this twist leaves you shaken, subscribe now, because the truths Derek uncovers only get darker from here. And if you're refusing to subscribe, comment below. Tell us, why would you stay silent when families like his are treated like collateral? Derek's fists clenched. She had a daughter. Aaliyah cried herself to sleep for years. And you're telling me that didn't matter? Carter held his gaze. It mattered, but not enough. Not compared to what she knew. If the wrong people found out she was still alive, the body count would be higher than you want to imagine. Derek's voice dropped to a whisper. So she left us, to save herself? Carter didn't answer. For the next hour, Carter explained just enough to terrify him. Selena had been a witness to something enormous. Organized crime, corruption, names that couldn't make the papers. She wasn't supposed to build a new life in Houston. That meant one of two things. Either the program failed or Selena had broken away from it willingly. And if she broke away, then she didn't just leave Derek. She abandoned him. She abandoned their daughter. By choice. Derek's chest burned with fury. So which is it? Did she walk away, or was she forced? Carter leaned closer, her voice firm. That's the wrong question. The question you should be asking is how long you've got before the wrong people notice you're asking. Derek leaned back, his stomach twisting. He wanted answers, but every one Carter gave him only dug the knife deeper. Mr. Lawson, she said finally, standing to leave. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. But if you keep digging, if you don't let this go, you won't just put yourself in danger. You'll put Aaliyah in danger too. Derek's eyes narrowed. What do you expect me to do? Just walk away? Yes, Carter said flatly. For your safety. For your daughter's safety. Let it go. Now picture that. 9 years of grief, a casket lowered into the earth, a daughter's tears, and now you're told to forget it all, to move on, because the truth is too dangerous to touch. If you were in Derek's shoes, would you walk away? Or would you demand answers no matter the cost? Subscribe now, because this story isn't done. The next revelation will put Derek closer to the truth, and closer to danger, than ever before. And if you won't subscribe, tell us in the comments. Why would you walk away when the truth is clawing at the door? Detective Carter reached the door. Before she left, she turned back, her eyes hard. One last warning. If you keep digging, Mr. Lawson, you and your daughter will both end up dead. The door clicked shut behind her. And Derek Lawson sat in the dim motel room, fists clenched, heart racing, caught between the fear of losing his daughter, and the rage of knowing his wife's grave had been a lie. Derek didn't sleep after Detective Carter left. Her warning echoed in his head. If you keep digging, you'll both end up dead. But the truth was, he had already crossed the line. Once you see your wife alive after burying her, there's no going back. By sunrise, he was parked outside the same quiet house in Houston. He told himself he'd just watch. Just make sure Aaliyah hadn't imagined it. But as the hours passed, his eyes stayed glued to the door. And then there she was, Selena. She stepped outside wearing jeans and a simple shirt, carrying a tote bag on her shoulder. She looked ordinary, like any other mother heading out for errands. But to Derek, every movement was surreal. He had memorized the way she brushed her hair back, the way her smile tilted to the left. Those details lived in his memory like old photographs. And here she was, alive, as if the grave had been nothing but theater. A man appeared behind her, the same tall figure Derek had seen before. He carried the little boy out, lifting him into a car seat with practiced ease. The three of them climbed into the SUV and drove off. Derek followed at a distance. They stopped at an elementary school. Derek watched as Selena bent down, kissed the boy's cheek, and sent him running inside with a backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Parents stood around chatting, sipping coffee, waving goodbye to their kids. Selena blended right in, like she belonged there. For Derek, the scene was torture. For 9 years, he packed lunches alone, walked his daughter into classrooms, fumbled through braiding her hair before school pictures. For 9 years, Aaliyah's mother was a ghost. And now he sat there watching Selena give another child the life Aaliyah had been robbed of. Rage burned in his chest. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. She had been alive. And she had chosen to give her love, her time, her laughter to someone else's child. Over the next several days, Derek shadowed her. He watched her shop for groceries at the local market, laughing with the cashier like she'd lived there forever. He watched her wave at neighbors, trading recipes with the woman across the street. He even watched her at a backyard cookout, dancing in the warm Houston evening, the glow of string lights flickering above her. Every smile, every laugh, every gentle touch she gave that man and child drove the knife deeper. It wasn't just survival. It was happiness. She hadn't just hidden. She had rebuilt. Now pause for a moment. Imagine raising your child alone for nearly a decade. Imagine every tear, every lonely night, every milestone missed. And then imagine seeing the person you buried, laughing, smiling, living that family life with someone else. Would you forgive them? Or would you feel robbed of everything that was supposed to be yours? If this betrayal cuts deep just hearing it, subscribe now, because what Derek uncovers next will leave you questioning loyalty, marriage, even love itself. And if you're refusing to subscribe, comment below. Tell us why. Why would you choose silence when betrayal this big is staring you in the face? The more Derek watched, the more dangerous his thoughts became. Late at night, sitting in his motel room, he imagined storming into the house, demanding answers, shouting in her face. He pictured grabbing her by the shoulders, shaking her, asking why she had left them to rot in grief. But then he thought of Aaliyah. How could he bring her into this mess? If Detective Carter was right, if dangerous people were still watching, then dragging Selena out of hiding might put his daughter in the crosshairs. Still, every time he thought about walking away, he saw Selena's smile. The smile that once belonged to him, now given freely to another man. And it made walking away impossible. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Derek sat in his car across from Selena's house. He watched through the open blinds as she read a bedtime story to the boy, her voice soft and melodic. It was the same voice she once used to sing Aaliyah to sleep. Tears filled Derek's eyes. He pressed his forehead to the steering wheel, shaking with fury and heartbreak. How dare she? How dare she let him and Aaliyah bury her, suffer her loss, drown in grief, only to start fresh as if they had never existed. Now think about it. If your loved one left you with nothing but questions, rebuilt a life with someone else, would you walk away? Or would you demand answers no matter the danger? Subscribe right now, because Derek's next move will drag him into a truth far darker than he's ready for. And if you won't subscribe, drop into the comments and tell us. Why would you let the story end here when the darkest chapter hasn't even begun? Derek leaned back in his seat, his pulse racing. He couldn't keep watching from the sidelines. He needed to know the truth, because the way Selena was smiling in that window, it wasn't the smile of a woman hiding in fear. It was the smile of a woman who had chosen a new life. And Derek Lawson couldn't rest until he knew why. 4 days, Derek had watched Selena's every move. School runs, grocery trips, backyard cookouts. Every moment carved new wounds into him. But then one night something changed. Instead of heading home after picking the boy up from school, Selena drove west. Past the neighborhoods, past the grocery stores, past the coffee shops. Derek followed, keeping 2 cars back. The streets grew quieter, the lights fewer. Soon she was driving through an industrial stretch on the edge of Houston, where warehouses stood like silent giants, their windows dark, their yards overgrown. Derek's chest tightened. Selena didn't belong here. What was she doing in a place like this? She pulled into a lot beside an old brick warehouse. The building looked abandoned, rusted siding, busted windows, weeds breaking through cracked pavement. But as Selena stepped inside, a figure appeared at the door, letting her through before closing it again. Derek's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a grocery run. He parked down the block, slid out of the car, and crept closer, sticking to the shadows. The air smelled of oil and damp concrete. A stray dog barked in the distance. Derek pressed himself against the wall, edging toward a broken window. Inside, dim light flickered against stacks of crates. Voices murmured low, too faint to make out at first. He crouched, straining to listen. Through the static of the night, he caught fragments. It's not safe here. The deal has to hold. He can't know. And then, clear as a bell, Selena's voice. If Derek finds out the truth, we're all dead. The words sliced through Derek like a blade. His breath caught. She had said his name. Not my husband, not my ex. His name. And she hadn't spoken it with love or longing. She'd spoken it with fear. Derek's knees nearly buckled. What truth? What could she possibly be hiding that put all their lives in danger? He pressed closer to the wall, desperate for more. But footsteps echoed, growing louder. The warehouse door creaked open, and Derek darted back into the shadows, heart hammering. 2 men stepped outside, scanning the lot, their heads on a swivel. Derek held his breath, barely daring to move. One wrong step, one sound, and they'd find him. The men smoked, muttering to each other in low tones before slipping back inside. Derek exhaled shakily, his chest burning. He stumbled back to his car, his mind racing. For 9 years he had believed Selena was dead. Then he believed she had left to build a new life. But now the truth was even darker. She wasn't just hiding. She wasn't just protecting herself. She was part of something. Something bigger. Something dangerous. And for the first time, Derek wondered if finding her was the biggest mistake he'd ever made. Now pause and ask yourself, if you discovered your loved one wasn't just alive but tangled in something dangerous enough to kill for, would you keep digging? Or would you run as far as you could? If you know you'd need to know the truth, subscribe right now, because what Derek uncovers next will make Betrayal look small compared to what's coming. And if you're refusing to subscribe, comment below. Tell us why you'd choose to walk away when the next secret could change everything. Back at the motel, Derek sat in the dark, his hands shaking. Selena's voice echoed in his head. If Derek finds out the truth, we're all dead. The words didn't just haunt him, they trapped him. Because no matter how much Detective Carter had warned him, no matter how much danger was circling, he couldn't walk away now. Not when Selena herself had confirmed it. There was a truth buried under this mess. A truth big enough to kill for. And Derek Lawson wasn't leaving Houston until he unearthed it. Think about the risk. Derek wasn't a detective. He wasn't trained for this. He was just a man, an ordinary father, pulled into a world where secrets meant death. And yet he kept going. Could you? Could you chase answers even when every sign pointed to danger? Subscribe now, because Derek's next step pushes him into the heart of the danger Selena's been hiding. And if you won't subscribe, comment below. Tell us why you'd walk away when the truth is already whispering your name. As Derek lay in the motel bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he knew one thing for certain. Selena Lawson wasn't just living a new life. She was living a lie. And the lie was darker than anything he had imagined. The next morning, Derek drove through Houston with heavy eyes and heavier thoughts. Selena's words from the warehouse replayed like a broken record. If Derek finds out the truth, we're all dead. He had to know what that meant. He couldn't go to the police. Detective Carter's warning was still fresh in his mind. So he turned to the only resource he had, the streets. He started small. Coffee shops, gas stations, places near the warehouse where Selena had met those men. He asked questions carefully, never using her name, just descriptions. Most people shrugged, said they didn't know anything. But others gave him whispers. Lot of strange business in those warehouses. Folks come and go at night. Always the same cars, tinted windows. You didn't hear it from me, but that's not the kind of place you want to be poking around. Each lead pulled him in different directions. Some said it was drugs. Others hinted at smuggling. One man swore it had to do with money laundering. None of it fit together. Derek felt like he was drowning in half-truths and rumors. And the deeper he waded in, the more dangerous it felt. Late one afternoon, while sitting in a diner off Highway 59, he noticed something unsettling. A man at the counter glanced his way a little too often. When Derek paid his bill and left, the man followed. Derek tested him, turning down streets, circling blocks. Each time, the man stayed behind him. Finally, Derek pulled into a crowded parking lot, slipped between cars and waited. Sure enough, the man drove past slowly, scanning the rows. Derek's stomach dropped. He wasn't just digging. He was being watched. Now pause for a second and picture this. You're alone in a city you don't know. You're chasing answers about a spouse you buried nearly a decade ago. And suddenly, strangers are tracking your every move. What would you do? Keep digging? Or run for your life? If you know you wouldn't walk away, hit subscribe right now, because Derek's next discovery puts him in the crosshairs of people who kill to keep secrets buried. And if you're refusing to subscribe, comment below. Tell us why you'd risk silence when danger is already watching from the shadows. That night, Derek checked into a new motel across town. He pulled the curtains tight, sat on the edge of the bed, and tried to piece things together. If Selena was tied to witness protection, why was she meeting men in warehouses? Why did she say his name with fear? And why were strangers tailing him? The questions gnawed at him. But every time he thought about stopping, he pictured Aaliyah's face. Her voice when she said, "Daddy, I saw Mom." He couldn't go home. Not yet. Not until he knew the truth. The following day, Derek drove past Selena's neighborhood again. He didn't stop, he couldn't risk being seen, but he noticed something chilling. A black SUV parked across the street. Same spot, engine running. 2 men inside. They weren't watching Selena's house. They were watching the street. And when Derek's car rolled past, one of the men lifted a phone to his ear. Derek's gut twisted. This wasn't coincidence. They weren't just watching him. They were tracking him. Now think about this. What would you do if every street corner, every gas station, every motel might be compromised? If you were already in too deep, but turning back could mean your child pays the price? Subscribe now, because Derek's next steps pull him face to face with the darkest betrayal yet. And if you're not subscribing, comment below. Explain to us why you'd turn away while the trap is already closing. Back in his motel room, Derek sat in silence, hands shaking. The game had changed. He wasn't just chasing ghosts anymore. Someone was watching him. Someone who didn't want him finding the truth. And for the first time, Derek Lawson realized he wasn't the hunter. He was the prey. Derek couldn't shake the feeling that the walls of Houston were closing in on him. Every corner, every parking lot, every motel hallway carried eyes he couldn't see. But he refused to leave. Not yet. Not when the pieces of Selena's disappearance were finally starting to fit together. It began with a file. Derek slipped into a records office downtown, the kind of place where old files gather dust and tired clerks barely look up from their coffee. He had learned enough from whispers on the street to know Selena's name might not appear in plain sight, but if she was ever placed in protection, there would be breadcrumbs. And he found them. Not much. Just fragments. A sealed case file with no details. A list of aliases. And one name that made his blood run cold. Selena had testified. Not against petty criminals. Against someone powerful. Someone whose name Derek recognized from late-night news stories, tied to money, politics, and whispered corruption. She hadn't been some innocent bystander swept into protection. She had turned on someone. And the staged crash? That was her cover. Derek stumbled out of the office into the bright afternoon sun, his chest heavy. So much of his life had been a lie. The funeral. The grave. The grief. He had carried it all because someone in power had needed Selena hidden. But now another question twisted in his gut. The man in her house. The so-called new husband. If Selena had been placed into a new life, who exactly was he? A new love? Or a handler? The more Derek thought about it, the less the pieces fit together. That night, Derek parked down the street again, watching through the blur of his windshield. The man carried himself with quiet authority, too careful, too precise. He never seemed fully relaxed. He scanned the street as he stepped outside, like someone trained to notice threats. Derek realized with a chill that the man didn't look like a husband at all. He looked like security. Now pause for a moment. Imagine burying your wife, grieving her, only to find her alive years later. Then imagine realizing the man she's with may not even be who you think he is. Is he a lover? A protector? Or something darker? If this revelation unsettles you, subscribe right now, because the truth Derek uncovers next will make you question every goodbye you've ever said. And if you're refusing to subscribe, comment below. Tell us why you'd rather sit in the dark while the truth is screaming at you. The more Derek watched, the more his rage tangled with fear. He saw Selena laugh at dinner through the kitchen window. He saw the man lean close to whisper in her ear. He saw the boy run circles around the living room, his laughter muffled through the glass. And then late one night he saw something that stopped his heart. Selena sat at the table alone, head in her hands. The man placed a folder in front of her, and her face crumpled. She shook her head violently. He leaned in, voice firm, insistent. She whispered something back, too quiet for Derek to hear. And then she slammed her fist against the table. The man stood quickly, slammed the folder shut, and stormed out of the room. Selena stayed behind, trembling, wiping tears from her face. It wasn't a marriage Derek was watching. It was control. Back at the motel, Derek's mind spun. Had Selena chosen this life? Or had she been forced into it? Was she building a new family, or trapped in one? Either way, the truth was darker than he had ever imagined. She hadn't just disappeared. She hadn't just been protected. She had betrayed someone powerful enough to fake her death. And now her very survival, and his own, hung by a thread. The next evening, Derek tried to clear his head, driving through downtown Houston. The streets glowed under neon signs and the buzz of nightlife. But even here he couldn't escape the feeling of being followed. At a red light he checked his mirror. A dark sedan lingered 2 cars back. He turned. The sedan turned. He circled the block. The sedan stayed with him. His palms went slick against the wheel. He floored the gas, weaving through traffic trying to lose them. By the time he cut down an alley and sped through a side street, the sedan was gone. But the warning had been delivered. Now think carefully about this. If every road you drove, every street you crossed, every shadow behind you could be the last thing you saw, would you keep going? Subscribe right now because Derek's next move drags him to the edge of life and death. And if you won't subscribe, comment below. Tell us why you'd let fear silence you when the truth is already in motion. Derek pulled into his motel lot, nerves shot, hands trembling. He thought he was safe as he climbed out of the car, the night air thick and still. But before he reached his door, a voice cut through the darkness. "Oh, Cole. Certain. Walk away now, or you'll never make it home." Derek froze, his blood running cold. Because in that moment he understood. This wasn't just about finding Selena. This was about surviving long enough to learn the truth. Derek couldn't take it anymore. 9 years of grief, sleepless nights, unanswered questions, boiling over into rage. He wasn't going to watch from the shadows any longer. That night, he left the safety of his car, walked across the darkened street, and stood at Selena's doorstep. His hand hovered over the doorbell, trembling. His breath came in shallow bursts. He thought of Aaliyah. He thought of the funeral. He thought of every moment he had whispered why into the darkness. And then, with one hard press, the bell echoed through the house. Moments later, the door opened. Selena froze, her face draining of color. "Derek," she whispered, her voice trembling. For a long, suffocating moment, they just stared at each other. Derek's chest heaved with fury. 9 years. I buried you. I raised our daughter alone. And all this time, you were alive. Selena's eyes filled with tears. "You shouldn't be here. Don't you dare," Derek snapped. "Don't you dare tell me what I should or shouldn't do. You owe me answers." She glanced over her shoulder nervously, then stepped aside. "Come in. But keep your voice down." The living room smelled faintly of lavender and home-cooked food. Family photos lined the mantel. Her, the boy, the man Derek had seen. But not one photo of Aaliyah. Not one trace of the family she'd left behind. Derek's throat tightened. "You replaced us." Selena shook her head quickly. "No, it's not like that." "Then what is it like?" Derek shouted, his voice cracking. "Explain to me how you let your husband and daughter bury an empty casket." Selena's eyes brimmed with tears. She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "Because if I didn't, you both would have died." For the first time, her words pierced his rage. He stood frozen, his breath catching. "What are you talking about?" Selena looked up at him, her face pale. "The night of the crash, it wasn't an accident. It was staged. I saw something, Derek. Something I wasn't supposed to see. I testified. And the people I testified against, they don't forgive. They don't forget." Derek's stomach churned. "So they faked your death. To hide you." Selena nodded weakly. "It was the only way. If they thought I was dead, they'd stop hunting me." Derek's fists clenched. "And you thought letting your daughter grow up without her mother was better than taking the risk?" Selena's face crumpled. "I thought it was the only way to keep her alive." Now pause here. Imagine being in Derek's shoes. The person you loved most in the world admits they faked their death. Not because they didn't love you, but because loving you meant putting you in danger. Would you forgive them? Or would the betrayal still be too deep? If you know this would tear you apart, subscribe right now, because the truth Selena reveals next will cut even deeper. And if you won't subscribe, comment below. Tell us why you'd turn away when the answers you've been waiting for are finally here. Derek's voice shook with rage and heartbreak. "Do you have any idea what you did to Aaliyah? She cried herself to sleep every night for years. She blamed herself. And you what? You just started over?" Selena's tears spilled over. "You think this is a life? You think I chose this?" She gestured around the room. "The man you saw, he isn't my husband. He's my handler. The boy isn't mine. They're cover. Every smile you saw, every laugh, it's all part of staying hidden." Derek's knees weakened, his anger giving way to shock. "So all this time, you've been a prisoner?" Selena nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes. I traded my freedom, my family, everything, to keep you both safe." The silence between them stretched heavy, broken only by the sound of Derek's ragged breathing. Finally he whispered, "You should have told me." "I couldn't," she said firmly. "The minute you knew, they would have watched you. And if you ever slipped even once, they would have killed you. And Aaliyah. Derek's rage wavered, but the wound was too deep. So instead, you let us think you were dead. Selena's voice cracked into a sob. I watched you at the funeral. From a distance. I wanted to run to you. To hold you. But I couldn't. If I broke then, everything would have been for nothing. Now think about that. Imagine watching your own funeral from the shadows, your loved ones sobbing over a grave, knowing you could never comfort them. Could you carry that weight? If this revelation hits you, subscribe now, because the lies aren't done yet. Selena's next words will tear open the final truth Derek never expected. And if you won't subscribe, comment below. Tell us why you'd let the story end here, when the darkest secret is still waiting. Derek's hands shook as he sat across from her. He thought of Aaliyah, her whispered words, "Daddy, I saw Mom." He thought of all the milestones she'd missed, the birthdays, the graduations, the late-night cries. Selena reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Don't. Her voice was barely a whisper. I never stopped loving you. Derek's chest burned with anger and longing. Love? You call this love? Love doesn't abandon. Love doesn't make graves out of lies. Selena's eyes hardened. And love doesn't let the people you care about die because of pride. I made the choice you couldn't. I chose survival. For you. For Aaliyah. For all of us. Her words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Derek's world spun. He wanted to hate her. He wanted to hold her. He wanted to scream, to cry, to demand she undo 9 years of hell. But all he could do was whisper one word. Why? Selena's answer was a whisper, trembling but clear. Because the man I betrayed is still out there. And if he finds out you know the truth, none of us will live long enough to see another sunrise. Derek sat in stunned silence, Selena's words echoing in his mind. The man I betrayed is still out there. Before he could press for more, headlights swept across the living room window. Selena froze. Her face went pale. They found you, she whispered. You have to go. Now. Selena. Go, she snapped, her voice sharper than he'd ever heard it. Derek's heart hammered. He wanted to drag her out with him, to finally reclaim the family they'd lost. But the fear in her eyes told him the choice wasn't his to make. She shoved him toward the back door, her hands trembling. Protect Aaliyah. Don't let them touch her. That's all that matters. It was the last thing she said before he slipped into the night. The days that followed blurred together. Derek returned to Birmingham shaken, haunted by every word, every look, every truth he'd uncovered. Selena never called. Never appeared. 1 week later, a story broke quietly in the Houston papers. A warehouse fire. No names, no arrest, just whispers of something gone wrong. Derek clipped the article, his stomach twisting. He didn't know if Selena had died in that blaze, disappeared into another life, or been taken by the same forces that had stolen her from him before. Her fate remained a mystery. And maybe that was the point. For Aaliyah, the truth was both a wound and a strange kind of healing. She had seen her mother with her own eyes, proved she wasn't crazy, proved her memories weren't a trick. But the knowledge came with scars. She stopped asking why. She stopped waiting by the window at night, hoping her mother would come home. Instead, she grew harder, sharper, determined never to let anyone lie to her again. Derek watched his daughter transform from the little girl who clutched a teddy bear into a young woman who carried her pain like armor. And in her strength, he found his own. Now pause and think about this. Every one of us carries secrets. Every family has cracks. But what happens when the lies are so heavy they bury love itself? Could you forgive? Or would you carry that bitterness for the rest of your life? If you know forgiveness wouldn't come easy, subscribe now, because stories like this remind us the truth is always darker than the funeral sermon. And if you won't subscribe, comment below. Tell us why you'd rather carry silence than face betrayal. The years passed. Derek and Aaliyah built something new, not perfect but steady. They visited the grave that might have been empty. They sat in church pews with the same old faces. They laughed sometimes, though never as freely as before. But at night, when the house grew quiet, Derek still heard Selena's voice. If Derek finds out the truth, we're all dead. And he wondered if somewhere out there she was still alive, watching, regretting, loving him from the shadows. Or if she was gone for good. That's the cruelty of mysteries like this. They don't end with clarity. They end with echoes, with scars, with the kind of questions that don't fade over time. And maybe that's why we tell them. To remind ourselves that behind every obituary, every headline, there may be a truth no one dares to speak. Now I'll turn this to you. You've heard Derek's story. You've walked with him through grief, betrayal, and revelation. So let me ask you, if you were in his shoes, if the person you loved most faked their death, left you drowning in grief and came back tied to something darker than you could imagine, what would you do? Would you forgive? Or would you never let it go? Subscribe now, because the stories we uncover here don't just entertain, they force you to face the hardest questions. And if you won't subscribe, then tell us in the comments. Could you forgive a grave built on lies? Or would you carry that wound forever? Derek Lawson never got the ending he wanted, but he got something else. A reminder that the truth doesn't wait for permission. It claws its way to the surface no matter how deep you try to bury it. And sometimes the truth leaves you with nothing but scars, and the strength to carry them. If you were Derek, would you forgive, or would you never let it go? This story leaves us with one haunting question. If the person you loved most buried you in lies, would you forgive, or would you never let it go? Drop your answer in the comments below, because I want to hear what you would do. And if you made it this far without subscribing, ask yourself, why? Why would you walk away from the very stories that reveal how fragile trust really is? Hit that subscribe button right now, because the next case I bring you might be the one that makes you question everything, and you don't want to be the last to know.